First Minister. Just here, please.
Hi.
What did you make of the government's immigration announcement today?
Well, the immigration white paper and the proposals in it represent an act of vandalism on the Scottish economy and public services. If those proposals were implemented, it would devastate the Scottish economy. Our demographics mean that we have a need to attract people to live and work in Scotland, and yet the proposals in this paper estimate that EU immigration will reduce by 85%. That will send Scotland's population into decline. It will depress economic growth and reduce revenues. So the impact would be devastating. It would also deprive us of talented, hard-working individuals who enrich our society. I've made those views very clear to the Prime Minister today. Those views are echoed by businesses and interests right across Scotland, and I hope very much that we see a significant change to the government's thinking.
Is there any way that the Prime Minister is going to get the support of the SNP for her deal, getting it through Parliament?
The SNP won't vote for the deal that the Prime Minister has put forward. We've made the reasons for that very clear. It takes Scotland out of the EU against our will. It takes us out of the single market and customs union. It gives no clarity about the future relationship. It potentially puts Scotland at a significant competitive disadvantage to Northern Ireland, which would have a real impact on jobs and inward investment. So the SNP will not vote for that. We have argued that Article 50 should be extended so that no deal is absolutely taken off the table, and that time is then given for Parliament to look at the alternatives to the deal. Our preference, of course, is for another EU referendum to give people across the UK the opportunity, knowing what they now know after the last 2.5 years, to change their minds.
What do you make of what Jeremy Corbyn is said to have said in the House of Commons this afternoon? That stupid woman.
Well, as I said on the way in, I haven't actually personally seen the footage, so I'm not really able to give my own judgment of whether he did or did not say that. But I would say a couple of things. If he did say it, then I don't think that is an acceptable comment, and he should apologise for it. That said, I do think there's something ironic and perhaps a bit galling to hear Tories who defend the rape clause to pretend that they've suddenly found feminism. But nevertheless, if he said that, he should apologise, and then everybody should move on, because frankly these issues right now are a distraction from the main issue, which is working out how we find a way through this sorry Brexit mess.
First Minister, can we quickly ask about immigration again? Polls suggest that Scotland has concerns over high levels of immigration as well. What makes you think that what the government's proposing today is bad for Scotland? Well,
it's bad for Scotland because the evidence says it will be bad for Scotland. I recognise that immigration is an emotive subject. It's not the easiest of subjects for politicians, but politicians have a duty sometimes to take on difficult subjects and to set out the reasons to the population why we think proposals are bad. The Scottish Government modelled what a 50% reduction in EU migration would do to the Scottish population, and it would take the Scottish population from a position of having our working age population increase to sending it into decline. Now, it doesn't need me to set out what the consequences of that are. Now, that would be bad enough, but this paper says that the proposals will reduce EU migration into Scotland by 85%. So it would be devastating for jobs, the economy, for living standards, the income of the country. And it would also, as I said, deprive us of people who make a big and positive contribution to life in Scotland. So, and of course, ending freedom of movement takes away all of our rights to live and study and work across Europe freely. So I think it's a really retrograde step. And I'm standing on our doorstep right now, but without being rude about it, it's beyond me that any Prime Minister would want to have as their legacy turning the UK inward and making it less open and welcoming to people from the rest of the world.
Did the Prime Minister give you any indication of what she might try over the next few weeks to get this deal through Parliament?
Well, it was a wee bit nebulous, but there's not a lot of detail there. She says she's working with the EU, trying to find assurances. I pressed her in the discussions we had to give a bit more detail on that. I have to say it wasn't forthcoming. It remains to be seen. We'll see whether she manages to achieve what she sets out. It looks to me unlikely at the moment. What I think is not acceptable, and I've said this repeatedly, is for her to simply run the clock down so that she's able to say to people it's my deal or no deal. There are alternatives to her deal. That's why I think the meaningful vote should have happened this week, to allow Parliament to vote and then to move on and look at what option could command a majority. And my preference, as I've said before, is another referendum to give people the opportunity to reverse this.
And when is the right time for Jeremy Corbyn to trigger a motion of no confidence in the government?
That was last week, in my view, was the right time. It's beyond me why Jeremy Corbyn seems to be one of the last remaining...
Nicola Sturgeon there. It's 5 o'clock. You're watching the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes. Read my lips. Corbyn denies calling May a stupid woman. An extraordinary sexism row in the Commons.
Said before, is another referendum to give people the opportunity to reverse this.
And when is the right time for Jeremy Corbyn to trigger a motion of no confidence in the government?
That was last week, in my view, was the right time. It's beyond me why Jeremy Corbyn seems to be one of the last remaining...
Nicola Sturgeon there. It's 5 o'clock. You're watching the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes. Read my lips. Corbyn denies calling May a stupid woman. An extraordinary sexism row in the Commons.
I did not use the